And we should be live now. Yes, we are. Let's get this recording started and let's boogie. All right, let's do it. Hey, everybody. Welcome into another fresh episode, if you will, of A Nichols Worth. I'm your host, Keaton Nichols. Make sure you follow me on the socials at Keaton D. Nichols. That's at Keaton D. Nichols. It's right there on your screen if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube. If you're watching us on either of those venues and outlets, you can see a copy of this episode and all the episodes right there on the A Nichols Worth page. You can also check us out on Spotify and some other places as well. Appreciate the folks for tuning in live. If you can, do me a favor and give this a share on your timelines. You never know who might want to join in the conversation. And feel free right there in the comment section to add your 2 cents in as well. I encourage and welcome conversations, as always, here on the show. Happy Friday to everyone out there. Congratulations on making it through another week. It's kind of important. A lot of things happening this week, and this was certainly a heavy news week. It didn't necessarily end any lighter either. We got some heavy news today. We'll talk a little bit about that. In the gun violence world of American politics. And we'll also talk about something interesting that happened in terms of forming a caucus in Congress today around some interesting values. So we'll talk about that as well. Again, feel free to jump in the conversation where you wish. Now, this week, as I mentioned, kind of a heavy week in terms of news, especially regarding police and shootings. Both of those concepts together, yes, and those concepts separately as well. We found out today, well, first, before we get there, a man shot and killed 8 of his coworkers before killing himself in Indianapolis just yesterday. More details are coming out about this, and we're finding out more. It's a horrific, absolutely horrific situation. There was another shooting in San Antonio involving police as well in that one. So lots of violence that continues to happen across the country. I don't necessarily want to conflate people's idea that suddenly violence is popping up or suddenly more shootings are happening now in this moment, more so than in previous moments. We went over this a couple of shows ago that the, sort of crime rates, the rate of police shootings and things like that, although they're horrific, seem to be happening at about the same rate over the past couple of years, no matter which administration that we're talking about. So sometimes when there's an increased sort of focus and an increased media focus on what's happening with these shootings, it can sometimes be skewed to sort of believe that more crime is happening suddenly in this moment. It's not necessarily the instance, but those stories are certainly troublesome stories to hear about in the news. But in Chicago today, we saw the body camera footage of the shooting death of Adam Toledo, 13-year-old Adam Toledo, who there's a longer story behind what happened with Adam Toledo, but he was running in Chicago there. He was running with a 21-year-old through an alley when Chicago police officer told him to stop and put his hands up, in which the video that we saw today appears that that's exactly what he did. He stopped and put his hands up, and not too long later, not even longer than a breath later, if you will, a moment, the officers then shoots Toledo, killing him not instantly, but killing him ultimately. And it was a very difficult sort of video to watch. It was a tough video to watch. It was something that brought out and invoked memories of Tamir Rice in Cleveland, just outside of Cleveland, back in, I think that was maybe, I don't even remember which year that was, but that's kind of what it reminded me of in that moment. There's a dispute over whether or not he had a gun or he didn't have a gun. And again, these are things that become completely and totally irrelevant in this conversation. Irrelevant in the conversation. And I say this again and again and again and again and again and again and again. if I believed that these were just tough situations that police find themselves in, and these are the individuals that they so happen to find themselves in these tough situations with, fine. I get it. But what we've seen is that we understand that police officers do have a certain code of conduct for individuals that may threaten the public. They may threaten the officers themselves. And when those people look like Tamir Rice, or they look like Eric Garner, or they look like somebody like that, Michael Brown, right? That there seems to be one code of conduct. And then when they don't necessarily look like that, there's a completely different code of conduct, that they suddenly understand respect, and they understand space, and they understand respecting people's civil rights to an extent. They at least understand not shooting and killing individuals that might find themselves in this position. So whether or not there was a gun or there was no gun, whatever the case is, I think we have to start to condition ourselves to stop looking for this exact situation and this exact scenario that would cause an officer to do something like what we saw. We want to justify this because we have an idea as to what police are in our minds, the vast majority, at least, of police, what they are in our minds. And so when something like this happens, even if you are not necessarily, super pro police, you kind of want to believe that there was a reason why. There was some outstanding circumstance that would have led to this outstanding sort of result here. But sometimes I think the answer might be a little bit simpler than that. The Chicago's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, a black woman herself, who I think is a lot more in touch with some of her residents than typical politicians are, but she is still a politician. She had a response to this video today at a press conference. She said they are incredibly difficult to watch, talking about videos depicting this kind of thing. They're incredibly difficult to watch, particularly at the end. No one should have a video broadcast widely of their child's last moments, much less be placed in the terrible situation of losing their child in the first place. She goes on to say, simply put, we failed, talking about the city now. She said, simply put, we failed Adam, and we cannot afford to fail one more young person in our city. Very strong words and things that, carry on a strong tone and a strong understanding that this is something that, Mayor Lightfoot says that she's very majorly interested in preventing from happening ever again. And we keep seeing this kind of thing happen in Chicago and in other cities as well. But what we're seeing more of is more detail as to how it's happening, why it's happening. Not just the account, the unofficial or, whatever account of the police officer or their superior that, that gives a recount to the media, which then feeds us that story as common people. A few years ago, states revamped their policies around body cameras on police. Now, the long and short of this is that each state kind of has their own rules and regulations for how body cameras are dealt with, basically, for each police officer. So there's no nationwide sort of standard for what police officers have to do regarding regarding body cameras. Sometimes they've been the sort of story when it comes to prior police shootings of the last couple of years. Sometimes it's been the story that a police officer has turned off their camera, or that they've deactivated it seemingly at a critical time in the interaction and things like that. But overall, I think that revamping of many states' policies on body cameras a few years ago has allowed us to see a lot more of these interactions between police and citizens. My fear back then was that, because this body camera conversation was being had within a moment when, a lot of Americans were justifiably sort of asking, what do we do about police violence? What do we do about, police shooting and killing innocent people, right? We need to do something more about this. There needs to be a higher level of accountability, and body cameras was seen as one of those answers to that. And I was afraid that just, that people would maybe get a little bit too high on that expectation, that it would correct officers' bad behavior. And I think in the last couple of years, we've seen very small incremental sort of improvement on officers' behavior, but the culture of it and the environment of it still very much so seems to be the same. And as I mentioned before, the numbers are definitely still the same in terms of how many people police officers are shooting every single year. What percentage of those people happen to be people of color? Doesn't change, right? Even with the increased use of body cameras. But body cameras overall are indeed showing us exactly how officers are messing up, how they're doing their jobs correctly, or in many cases incorrectly. And when it comes to reform, I think there's a few very key things to remember here. Is that we've been in a system of policing here in the United States, a particular system of policing for so long that we haven't really searched alternatives to what we've experienced in American policing. And I bring up the story sometimes of Minneapolis Police Department, which of course attempted and got very close to actually, sort of removing the police from their neighborhoods entirely and replacing them with something else, except for the replacement part was kind of lacking in creativity. What exactly are police officers supposed to do if they're not doing what they're currently doing? That's a question that's sort of out there. And the answer might seem bluntly obvious, especially for people of color. Stop killing people unjustifiably, right? Or shooting them or injuring them or paralyzing them, whatever the case is. Stop doing that thing, right? But I think more specifically for others, the answer becomes, what exactly are police supposed to do? And I think peering into the soul, if you will, of body camera use of police officers across the country is showing us in sometimes in grave detail exactly how these officers are messing this whole thing up, where officers are going wrong. And my fear that wouldn't necessarily push us into a mode where we would be apt for change is still correct. I don't think that the body cameras themselves have pushed us more towards an era of reform. I don't. But I do think that what we're seeing now is that there are core fundamental aspects of policing and police officers themselves that are fundamentally flawed. And that those fundamental flaws are going to be impossible to separate from the type of reform in this society that we really want to see. So right now, demolish the police or defund the police or whatever these other terms are that go around this concept seem extreme. And I think a large part of the reason why they seem extreme is because we just don't know what else could be out there for us. We don't know how much better this public service of keeping everyone safe could be until we really take a deep dive as to what our system looks like now, and a real critical deep dive as to what our system looks like now, and to come up with those alternatives. It's slow progress. I know it sucks because I want that hammer piece of legislation that changes everything overnight, because as Mayor Lori Lightfoot said, we cannot afford to fail one more young person in this system. No, we can't afford to do that. But what the movement or lack of movement on this issue has shown us in the past is that cities and municipalities, states, and the federal government itself is okay with this continuing to happen disproportionately to young African Americans and young black and brown people in general. They're okay with this happening for a little while longer until we figure something out. That's the sense of urgency that many people have behind an issue like this, that we don't want to keep seeing this kind of thing on TV, on CNN, running again and again and again. We don't want to see this thing, but we also don't want to sit back and wait on the system to autocorrect itself, a system that for 150 years has had a lot of core issues. A lot of core issues with the way that they do business with the people of this country. The very diverse background and palette of people in this country. So it's something to keep in mind. We have to keep the conversation about reforming police alive. We have to, even when it seems to die out, even when it's not the politically popular thing to do. The need to reform policing goes way beyond just getting angry and upset and covering stories when something like this happens. Can't keep coming back to the same pot. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section about this issue. Body camera footage is definitely helping. But what do you think? Should there be steps that we take to go further on this issue? I personally don't think that it really makes much of a difference unless we push this past the discussion phase. And pushing this past the discussion phase may mean a replacing of certain types of leadership that's willing to go there, quote unquote, go there. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section. The other story for today that I found particularly interesting, I was scrolling through the Twitterverse, the infamous Twitterverse. I saw this story. I saw Angelo-Saxon, the term Anglo-Saxon trending, and I said, what's this all about? And I was not disappointed at how disappointed I ended up being, and the reason why this term was trending. And it shouldn't be a total surprise if you've been paying attention to politics, but let's just check it out. So what I found out is that the term Anglo-Saxon trending on Twitter was tied to this story about several House Republicans. This is according to The Hill. Several House Republicans led by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. We'll come back to her, and of Georgia, and Paul Gosar of Arizona. They are forming a caucus in Congress, we'll get into that in just a second, that calls for common respect, quote unquote, for uniquely Anglo-Saxon political traditions. Those are words directly from the document used to recruit more members into this caucus. Wow. A common respect for uniquely Anglo-Saxon political traditions. Why don't you just say that we're trying to bring white back? Like we're trying to full scale represent white people in Congress in a way that we don't have to be exactly so explicit about it, right? A policy platform for the group, which calls itself America First Caucus, no surprises there either, declares that a certain intellectual boldness is needed in order to follow President Trump's footsteps, I'm not making this up, and potentially step on some toes and sacrifice sacred cows for the good of the American nation. Now, that last part, I'm not really sure what they're getting into, but I don't know if I want to know what they're getting into with sacrificing cows for the good of the nation and all this other stuff. But there's a few things that that are like super incredible coming out of this story. For those that are a little bit unfamiliar, there are caucuses within Congress. There's 434 5 representatives in Congress, rather. And there's different, sort of congressional committees and senatorial committees and things like that, that can kind of form around certain ideas. Some are really conservative, some are liberal, some are for like farming and, specific stuff like farming. Some are, there's a freedom caucus, right, that formed, that protects things, all things like American freedom, right? These things can be very general, they can be very specific, but anyway, they're basically like clubs within Congress that form together, congressmen that kind of join together to help support and help push across certain objectives in Congress. So whereas general Congress might not care about the Freedom Caucus objectives, right? They know, you can't get everyone to get on board with making sure that the U.S. flag is in every school, right? Something like that. But the Freedom Caucus could probably generate a lot of energy for that, right? And if you can get enough congressional support in that one group, hopefully, in short, it ripples and takes effect in other areas of Congress, right? So this is what the purpose of a caucus is, to gain support for a particular idea within Congress. Anyhow, what Marjorie Taylor Greene and company are attempting to form together here is an America First caucus that, as I said, brings forth the common respect for uniquely Anglo-Saxon political traditions. That just simply means they are forming a caucus in the U.S. Congress to represent white people and white interests. Sometimes there's thinly veiled political strategy where it's like, okay, we're going to go ahead and backdoor this kind of thing over here, but what we really want to promote is this thing over here. Like this is sort of thing that it's understood. It's a natural sort of thing that happens in politics. But what we see here in the formation of the attempted formation of this caucus is not veiled at all. It's not thinly veiled. It's not veiled at all. America First Caucus is the name of it, right? Anglo-Saxon political traditions needing to be protected in a country like the United States is at best a joke, but this is a real political movement. These are people who are in Congress, right? These are not bloggers on the internet that have come up with some sort of internet chat room for people who are just idiots or whatever to spend all their time. These are elected members of Congress that are now forming like a QAnon sort of like group within Congress. These are people that are making laws and rules and stuff like that. Just saying, it shouldn't be a total surprise if you've been paying attention to politics. I had to do a little digging on Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's come to prominence so much recently and been in the news so much recently. She actually in 2018 criticized the 2018 election of Democratic Representatives Ilhan Omar of Minnesota and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. They were the first two Muslim women elected to Congress. She basically criticized them, saying that they were a part of this Islamic invasion of our government. Very dog whistle and racist, xenophobic, a number of other things that you could throw into the pot of bad stuff that is wound up in there. But anyway, I said that her title is Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Marjorie Greene Taylor. Is it Marjorie? It's Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she was elected to Congress in this 2020 election. She was sworn in 2021, January of 2021, just a couple of months ago. This is not a situation where the person who is leading out this effort to restore Anglo-Saxon values in Congress is somebody that's been there for years and years and then was suddenly radicalized by what they read on the internet or watched some video from YouTube page 89, and now suddenly, they believe this stuff, right? She ran on this platform of being a racist POS. And what she did is that she won on that platform, not in 1876, not in 1911, not in 2000 or 2008. She won in 2020. Last year. Her election to Congress should have put us on alert about where we are as a country truly politically here. The focus might be on Joe Biden. He's the conductor of the train, and much of what happens in the next couple of years is going to be sort of given to Joe Biden, whether he deservedly, should have it or not. The good stuff, the bad stuff, everything's going to fall on Biden's lap because he's the head person in charge right now. But there is a heavy influence of Trump still in Congress now through characters like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was, by the way, stripped of all her, basically fun caucus stuff, committees assignments earlier this year because of how overtly racist and conspiratorial she was in certain things. That's a whole other story. I don't even have enough time to break all that stuff down with Marjorie Taylor Greene, but she's an interesting watch if you just want to go and check her out on your own time. But this is what it is, right? Like the stench of Trump is still there. There's a few things that we have to remember about Donald Trump whenever we hear about the news like we heard about today and the formation of this caucus today. And that's that a few things, right? That he found success in politics through the Republican Party. He found success in politics. We don't like to give Trump that he actually found success in politics. He did. He did find success. We might not have liked it. Many of us might not have liked it, but he did. And he did so through the Republican Party, which was much more sympathetic, by the way, to his viewpoints. Maybe not his methodology. As a matter of fact, I know they're not sympathetic to his methodology, but they're certainly sympathetic to his viewpoints. And so Donald Trump was able to enter this whole political realm through the Republican Party, which means now the Republican Party, which doesn't have Trump in it, at least within the fray, within the imagery of the Republican Party, the Republican Party now has to figure out who it is now that Trump really isn't involved in that. And that's a constant process. That's the impact of that and of him sort of taking his approach to the Republican Party. Another thing, is that a lot of that support for Donald Trump, a lot of those votes for Donald Trump came from long-term conservatives or people that were conservative leaning in some way, shape, or form. And they were getting tired of the GOP being this, lame sort of party that supported the same old tired, rusty sort of things because they believed that the country was slowly shifting. The average, the middle, the median, the mean, I don't know what word this is. It was shifting in this country, and it was shifting to the left, if you will. It was shifting in the wrong direction. What the country was becoming and what the country had allowed from Barack Obama as the first African-American president to all the social sort of reforms that we started to see in those next 8 years afterward. That was a big red flag, no pun intended, for a lot of Republicans. And they wanted something stronger. So when Trump comes along, he offered them that. He offered them what turns out to be bold moves for pro-white people. That's an important one. Bold moves for pro-white people. People in this country that felt like that average and that mean, if you will, was way too far to the left and that it needed to be readjusted. That there was a level of conservatism that was just kind of dead and just not doing it anymore. And there needed to be something a little bit more extreme, if you will, to pull the country back to a more basic approach, a more pro-white, a more white in general approach. And I know there's going to be people that are like, what does that have to do with race? I don't have enough time on this podcast to explain what exactly that has to do with race. But it seems to be quite obvious that there are a lot of people who are tied into the Trump message, if you will, not for strategical purposes, not for economical purposes, financial purposes, not for anything that might lead to them having a better life overall. But it does seem to be centered around one very, very key concept. Can we make this country what it once was? Can we take back this country and make it something else? The Trump campaign called it great. Can we make America great again? Again, not so thinly veiled sort of messaging to an audience that obviously liked him. And we have to contend with that. There's a lot of people that liked him in this country. Long term, he was not successful as a politician. That's as a politician. He was not successful because he was not very tactful. He was not very strategic in his approach. He was unfit sort of for the molds of the GOP party, the party in which he decided to ride this horse on in. He didn't fit well within the strategy, but still a lot of people liked him. 72 million votes is a lot of votes. It wasn't enough votes. Thank God, but it was still a lot of votes. People like this guy, and that energy that that they kind of lost out on in the November 2020 election is attempting to be recouped by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is an elected member of Congress. We can't just kick her out. The people wanted her here because she helps represent things that play in the favor of Donald Trump and his political agenda, if you will. One that's been clipped majorly because Trump can't post on Twitter right now. He can't post on Facebook. He cannot be an influence on the social scene really at all at this point. So there are others that certainly seem to be on board with this kind of thing as well moving forward. To wrap it up, I think that political organization doesn't have to be exclusive to these extremist groups. In the last couple of years, we've kind of seen the political landscape, which already wasn't on solid ground, but we saw the political landscape being tremendously affected by the extremists, the people on the far right and the far left. The people that used to be individuals, stragglers that didn't really have much of an impact on the system at all, those people started to get organized. And it really tremendously impacted what we are seeing in Congress right now. The individuals that we are seeing in Congress right now more so represent the interests of these extremists, at least the new ones, I should say, are representing more so the interest of the extremists than the people who are in the middle. And you know who's in the middle? Most of us. Most of the people that are going to be listening to this, I believe the vast majority of the country lies in the political middle. We're not far rights. We're not far lefts. That's not how this country is defined. And the more that we try and define this country through those extremes, the less we're going to find the balance that we need to actually operate. The balance that we need quite literally as a democracy to survive. It's just how things were set up in this country. We need that. And the further we pull away from each other with things like this, the worse off we're going to be. Now, I've also been an opponent of just holding hands and saying, let's all just be together and ignore our problems and the reality of our problems. I don't think that we should necessarily do that either. But I think working together truly involves work. Being an extremist is easy. It allows you to turn off half of your brain and just indulge in the things that make you feel good. But unfortunately, we live in a country where we are not homogenous in our interests and our ideals and all that other stuff. We are a very mixed country with very mixed ideals. And it's an experiment that still to this day, 270 plus, 280 plus years later, is still trying to get it right. But the extremists within that process have a chance to throw off a large portion of that experiment and wind a lot of people up in places that they don't want to be. As we continue to carve out what exactly our political future is and how we build that political future, let's remember that. It's not about one side winning out or the other. If the Republicans, our future is not rather dependent upon the destruction of the Republican Party and all Republicans. That's just a game that we play. If we want these things to actually work for us, our goals and our objectives have to be a little bit higher than that. So let's keep that in mind as we continue to search for what we want politically and what we need politically in this country as well. Thanks for joining me on the program tonight. That is all I have. I'll be back on Monday for another edition of A Nichols Worth. If you want to check out more of the show, go to Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube.com/A Nichols Worth, any of those places, and type in A Nichols Worth. Also follow us on Facebook. Follow me on socials at Keaton D. Nichols. And you can also, none of that. You can also catch up on any episodes that you've missed on my pages as well. Hit me up, ask me questions, send me stories. I love to hear from you all as well. So thank you all for joining me, and I will see you all on Monday. Have a great weekend.